Welcome back to Misguided the podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Facciani, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Shae Omonijo. Shae is a historian and the founder of Analog Social. She's currently finishing her PhD in history at Harvard University, where her research examines the intersections of exile, empire, and political belonging. But her work goes far beyond the archives. Shae is passionate about making history accessible to the public and reshaping how we engage with it. In this conversation, we'll dive into what first inspired her to pursue history, her efforts to bring historical knowledge beyond academia, and her work founding Analog Social, a project dedicated to reclaiming real-world connection in an age of digital overload. We'll also discuss how history is shaped, erased, and sometimes distorted, and how our understanding of the past can help us navigate misinformation today. This was such an engaging and insightful conversation. Let's get started. Before we dive into all the really cool work that you're doing now, what first inspired you to pursue a PhD in history, and what motivated you to bring historical knowledge to the public beyond academia?
Yes. So growing up, I always loved reading, especially like encyclopedias. Like I actually just found one of my like old collections of encyclopedias from a very long time ago that was like pre Wikipedia and things of that sort. And because of my encyclopedia collection, I've always loved like memoirs and biographies, but it's just something that's been like at the back of my mind. Until I went to college, and I went to the University of Chicago, where, you know, it's such an interesting place to be as a Black woman because the campus is in the middle of the South Side of Chicago, which is a predominantly Black neighborhood. But then the campus is like anything but that. You know, when I went there, the Black population was much smaller than, you know, the South Side of Chicago, significantly smaller. So I was, you know, looking for people that looked like me, either, you know, in the student body or through campus, even within faculty and staff, just so I had some sense of belonging. And then one day I looked for that sense of belonging in the archives at the University of Chicago, because I'm like, okay, there had to be Black students that went here. Like, you know, it's Chicago. It's such an old university. Like, there's no way, you know, I'm the first to have these thoughts. And then, I stumbled across Dr. Georgiana Simpson, who was the first Black woman to earn a PhD in the United States. And, you know, working closely with the university archivist and just looking at the behind the scenes stuff and what does it mean to work with a personal archive? Because, you know, I'd grown up reading and watching documentaries about people's lives, but then to actually have to work with someone's actual life, you know, in the archives, I was like, this is amazing. So graduated from college, took some time off, and then I was like, you know what? I think history is going to be the best path for me, just because, I just really love the lessons and the insight we can get from people's lives and the way that history gives us a sense of belonging many, many years after, you know, someone is gone.
Yeah, that's great. So then as you navigated that, you've been, you know, so public sharing this knowledge. What kind of made you go that direction too? Because sometimes in academia, we're not always incentivized to share it with the larger public.
Yeah, you know, so part of my story actually is looking at how we can represent history to the public through art. So when I was an undergrad, I raised close to $50,000 with a really close friend of mine to commission a public monument of Dr. Georgiana Simpson, and to make sure that we are telling her story as authentically as possible, also to as many people as possible. Because it would have been easy for me to be like, oh, okay, here's the scoop on like Black students at the University of Chicago, do a fancy op-ed, and then just like leave it at that, right? But for me, it's like, okay, Dr. Georgiana Simpson had a life. She was part of an organization. She made significant contributions. So how can I tell her story to those communities that matter? Like, she was a part of a historically Black sorority. And I remember seeing one of the sorority members' faces when she was looking at the monument. She's like, that's Georgie. You know what I mean? So when you see a 96-year-old woman, like, you know, smiling like a kid at seeing a monument, you're just like, yes, this is what history is about. Because if it's just sitting at the back of, you know, a shelf or it's just collecting dust, that doesn't mean it doesn't have value, but is it reaching the kind of people who could really use her story at certain moments in their lives? So I think for me, just remembering that reaction, I always knew that I wanted to, yes, produce rigorous scholarship. That's so important. We need it now more than ever. But then also making sure that people who are directly impacted by these stories also benefit from it. Because I think the stereotype, as you said, with the ivory tower is that, you go and accumulate a bunch of knowledge and then you just hoard it and you just hold on to it and you just walk around full of knowledge. And then it's like, maybe if you went through the same grueling 8 years of a PhD program, then talk to me. And it's like, no, like, guys, like, if anything, we're the most privileged people to be able to, tell these stories and also support other people who tell these stories. Like, like I love people who've reached out to me based off of like a little snippet I've done on someone's life, a mini documentary for my grandma to watch. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, I also don't want to make it seem like we as academics are like the gatekeepers for all information or all history, but that if anything, we can be conduits because of like the amount of time and expertise that we've dedicated to the craft of history. So
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that. I definitely feel similarly that it's almost an obligation that we have to share it, given the privilege that we have and this opportunity to share it with so many people that don't have, 8 years to devote to studying some niche topic like we do. Yeah. So yeah, I've been following your newsletter, and I really enjoyed following your 100 historic Black women you should know before Election Day series. That was really cool. And I was curious if you could share with my listeners who might not have followed it, any key insights or takeaways that you wanted to share while researching and reading about these stories.
Yes, it was probably one of the most challenging forms of content I ever produced because, it's like taking my love for memoirs and biographies like to a new level and like producing like 100 short content pieces for people to absorb, and realizing that, I have a limited amount of time because, I'm still like writing my dissertation. I have a life, I have people to take care of, right? So I have a limited amount of time. How can I like just distill one or two single like nuggets of someone's life? So I'm not trying to tell their whole story. I'm not trying to, be an authority on this person. I'm not even trying to, be the person that helps you discover this new person. Like, you know what I mean? Like, for me, it's more so like, oh, look at these range of Black women, from politics to art to academia to science to every field, and just realize that they made contributions across the board. Like, for me, it was more so like, okay, what are the breadth of stories I can tell? Because I just don't have the time or the capacity to do the depth of like 100 fully blown like individual documentaries. Instead, like, okay, how can I show you that Black women struggled in, opera as much as they did in running for office? They struggled, having to choose between a family and teaching in the DC public school system, as much as, becoming the first sculptor to ever, do a piece of someone famous, right? So realizing that there's struggles, but then also there's triumphs, like, like some of the quotes that I would find where they're just like, you know what, like, my life was not the easiest, but at the end of the day, I'm grateful that this is the time in which I was born. You know what I mean? I'm grateful that I was able to use my talents and my skills in this specific way. I think the beauty of doing this research is almost like retraining myself like I was in college again, where it's like, okay, how do I take all this information and turn it into an essay that's due at midnight? Well, thankfully, I mean, if I missed a day, it wasn't like the end of the world. Like, hopefully I still got an A and people still listen. But yeah, that's how it started.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a lot of content. So that's cool. You're able to share it with so many people and give even an introduction to all these stories that other people that they might not have otherwise even learned about. So I think that's great. Kind of related to that, we know that history is often shaped by those in power, leading to bias and misinformation. So I was curious if there is any common myths or historical inaccuracies that you wish more people understood, just related to anything, either that series or anything in particular that you wanted to shed some light on.
That's actually a really good question, because I think, especially when it comes to historical misinformation in the age of the internet, where anyone can pretty much make anything up and there's no sense of like, is this true? Where are your sources? Can we like peer review or site check this? We have to realize and learn more about the craft of history itself, right? So there's this really great book called Silencing the Past. And the premise of the book is that in the production of history, there's always going to be certain silences. We cannot tell the full story of a person's life, of an event, or certain aspects of history. That's why there has to be a lot of historians with a lot of different perspectives. And that's why the field of history itself cannot always just be one specific race or one specific gender or one specific kind of person, because we need as many people as possible to tell those stories. So yes, there's always some form of silences. But actually, what I think what's more so important is to understand that when you're consuming history information in general, you have to ask yourself, was this information deliberately hidden, which can lead to a slew of misinformation, conspiracy theories, all this other stuff. There are legitimate cases where, like even here in London, in the UK, where it's like historical documents from the British Empire were like purposefully, hidden and destroyed and like things of that sort. That's one thing. But then we also have to ask ourselves, like, critical thinking skills. Was this information hidden, or is this information just new to me? And that's important because history teachers, social science teachers, humanities teachers get a bad rap because you often see things on the internet like, we never learned this in school. How were we supposed to know this? Da, da, da. For example, I can't teach 300 years of British imperial history in one semester. I tried. I failed. But I can't do that as one person. So I think like as people are consuming information, people love history YouTube channels. People love history TikToks. That's so important. But I think to guard our sensibilities against some actual like misinformation, we have to be very clear. Like sometimes this is just information that's new to you, and that's okay. Take it, but then also don't run with it and turn it into this big conspiracy theory and people are trying to do something against you and da-da-da. And honestly, realize that the history industry as well has to, in order to move forward, has to give you this narrative that this is like a hidden history or uncovering history or never before seen documents. No, we saw the documents. Someone wrote about it in 1975. And his dissertation never made the light of day. And that's why, you know what I mean? So I don't think it's really about like individual facts, because there's historical facts that can be disputed, and there's some that can't. But I think the importance is knowing the difference between those two and what actual historians do to make sure that we're providing accurate information and being clear when something is disputable and when something's not. Like, you know what I mean? The American Civil War happened, not disputable. Other events happened, not disputable. But like, you know what I mean? Let's be intentional about what we can debate and talk about at length. So.
Yeah, that's great. Definitely intersects with my background as far as media literacy, digital literacy, critical thinking. And I really like how you summed that up as, is this new to me, or is it just, it doesn't have to be some kind of conspiracy.
Yeah.
It could just be that you're not aware of your own limitations, or maybe not reflecting thoughtfully on your own biases, which is a common thing for just the human experience, like we're just humans trying to figure it out, and we all have our own backgrounds, and we're not one person is going to be perfect at analyzing everything, right? Since we all have these unique experiences. And so I really like how you approach that, and it kind of connects to this other topic, this other project you've been working on. So I think a lot about social connectedness and social isolation, and how that influences how we see the world, kind of connected to recognizing our own biases. If we are only in a certain bubble, we're only getting a certain amount of information, it can really change how we process other information, how we form beliefs. And I know that you have been creating this new organization called Analog Social. And I was wondering if you could just talk about what that is and what gap do you see it filling in today's digital world?
Yeah, so Analog Social actually just started as a series of dinners with friends and people I had just randomly met in DC while working on my dissertation. It's actually deeply connected to the life of someone like me, where I'm a PhD candidate, I travel often, I'm doing research, and I don't always have my core community nearby. So I wanted to create a space where people could talk about big ideas without looking at their phones or being distracted or getting notifications, and to do that around food. And I think the historian in me is just really leaning into this idea that new and innovative doesn't always have to mean better. You know what I mean? There's ways in which in the past we gathered around a table, conversations, had meaningful conversations, and that helped create cohesive social bonds. But Analog Social is all about like, okay, can we create a space and a community of people so that no matter where you are in the world, you always have a third space you can go to number one, always supporting local third spaces. But also, number two, you have a community of thinkers who don't necessarily have to be like-minded. You know, because once again, the historian in me is like, you know, the ability to move and to live outside of your immediate community is actually fairly new in the span of time. Before, you know, where you lived, before there was mobility, you could leave, take a car, have a train, go to school outside of your state or your area, leave your hometown, choose where you work, choose where you live. You sort of kind of, for better or worse, stuck with the communities that you had. And because of that, you had certain social skills. You had to learn how to disagree while still having to have dinner with that person at the end of the day. You know, if it was within your immediate family, you had to learn how to, you know, garden and do agriculture along someone who, you know, you either really love them or, you know, they stole your stalk of corn. You're just like, I have a grudge against you. But hey, I'll still see you at the next community, like, you know, feast, sort of thing. So it's just looking at ways in which we gathered in the past and how that can heal some of the blockages we see with social media and like phones and really just like digital fatigue as well. But also, I don't want to make it all about the phones. I don't want to make it all about the internet, because at the end of the day, that's only one part of the problem. Right? It's like we as a society need to re-socialize ourselves, need to know what it means to be in community, because community takes work and it doesn't always mean you're with like-minded people. What it means to welcome boredom. Like, our minds are not meant to be constantly on and constantly scrolling and, you know, constantly in front of screens. You know, as someone who's writing her dissertation, you know, my screen time is crazy. Like, you know what I mean? It's ungodly. And that's why I'm intentional. Like, okay, when I'm having dinner, I turn my phone off. I, you know, stow it away. I don't look at screens. You know, I prefer to read physical books on the tube on my way home. Like, you know, stuff like that, where it's like, if we're all more intentional and not saying like, you know, these phones and everything are so bad. Like, in some ways, they've really helped actually build some communities, right? We're not denying that. It's just saying, how can we temper it to make sure that we're still being human beings, and that we're still learning and growing without losing our core sense of self, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I think you've really identified an important need in society today, where the internet and social media has made us more connected in some ways and then less connected in other ways. And we're definitely seeing this trend of isolation and loneliness. And I think that's a really cool opportunity to try to bring people together. And you're right, like, it doesn't have to be this novel new concept of like community. Like, we've always known community is important. It's just we've kind of drifted away from that, given this digital emphasis we've had in our culture the last few years, and especially with COVID. I mean, I feel like COVID really highlighted the vulnerability when we are so dependent on our phones and so stuck on in our digital worlds, and how that can negatively affect people. So yeah, I mean, that's great. So what goals do you have for your organization moving forward? Like, what plans do you hope to see enacted in the next couple years?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is just really looking at the city expansion. So making sure that we can truly be almost like a global social club that owns no property. We just want to bring people into the third spaces that already exist. You know, this past Sunday, I hosted a Sunday roast here in London, and we have it at a beautifully family-run pub here in London. And, you know, I love working with them. I love hosting events there and just making sure that, you know, and it was a wide range of people. I mean, we had people as young as 23, as old as 53. It's multi-ethnic, it's multi-generational, you know, it's people with different ideas and different perspectives and different things, like, you know, so it's just making sure that at the end of the day, we're a place, which is our tagline, where thinkers think. So the most important thing when you sit at an analog social table is you're a deep thinker and you care about ideas and you love to discuss them. Preferably over food. But we're looking at alternative formats as well, trying to get more people out into nature and making sure that we're taking wellness in all of its forms very seriously. So social wellness, digital wellness, mental wellness, and looking at ways we can help people connect with themselves better, but then also connect with communities. But one thing I did want to say, going back to the previous question, because I'm curious about your perspective on this.
Yeah.
I feel like misinformation really thrives in certain like corners of the internet, and it reinforces this like social isolation that we're experiencing. Or maybe it's the other way around. Because of social isolation, people are driven to the internet, and we start to see misinformation and conspiracy and all this other stuff like thriving. Like, what trends have you seen, especially post-pandemic, in terms of like, are more people starting to be like self-aware of what the internet is doing to them? Or is it just a matter of like, I'm so much in this echo chamber and thought bubble that my Reddit thread said I'm always right? Like, I can't be wrong.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both. There's a lot of factors going in there. I mean, I feel like on the one hand, there's all this media and digital literacy initiatives. So people are trying to showcase the issues that you raised there about being manipulated by algorithms. And I think there is an awareness of that. But what the larger issue often is people often think it's other people that are affected by that, not me. And that's the trick, is like, oh, well, other people fall for misinformation and are in echo chambers, but I'm not. Like, and I think that's the trick, is that kind of human bias that we try to center ourselves. So that's why, I think your group, your organization is so interesting, and organizations and just in general, like when we get more people together, I think you really see the power of community and integrating different perspectives, because one of the most powerful counters to misinformation is talking to another person who thinks differently than you, and they can, highlight different limitations of your own arguments or belief structures that you formed, or just expose you to a different perspective. And if you never have that opportunity, then it's so easy to fall prey in these general patterns of, well, the people and the sources I'm most familiar with are the ones that happen to be right, and they make me feel good, and I'm familiar with that, so there's not much of an incentive to go outside that bubble. So that's kind of my thought on it. It's a bit mixed. Where
interesting. Yeah.
But I hope that more people are aware of it, to the point where it breaks through that bias of it's other people and not me. And that's what I try to do with my own work. And that's a big part of this podcast and my book, and everything that I do is trying to teach how we're all vulnerable to this. And there are ways to overcome it, and we can empower people to think more critically when we give them resources and connect them with other people that can rise all of us up together. That's my take on it.
Oh, I love that. That's why I'm so excited for your work, because I think, at the end of the day, when it comes to misinformation, it's all rooted to like sort of what you're saying, it's all rooted in a deep desire to want something to be true so badly, for one reason or the other, either your background or something that happened to you or something like that, so it's like, at the end of the day, because we all have deep desires, we're human beings. I mean, the humanist in me, of course, is like, hey guys, like, this is normal. We have to interrogate, like, why do we believe what we believe? Why do we think what we think? So
Yeah, absolutely.
Big ups to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I often think about those needs for accuracy and community too. Like, that's one of the big things that I talk about, is like, when people are like, how can someone believe this thing that's so clearly false? And I try to share the social science behind that. It's like, well, if that thing that they believe gives them community and meaning in this world, then it's pretty rational to believe it. Like, even though the belief itself is not based in evidence or empiricism, the social benefits and the meaning benefits have such a profound impact on their own psychology that it makes sense for them to hold on to that belief very closely. So, yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Looking forward to the work.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we covered so many cool things here. So I wanted to wrap up with a broader question about the future. So as both a historian and someone reimagining social spaces, what do you hope people will do differently in how they engage with history and with each other moving forward?
That's a good question. I really want people to, on the history side of it, be open to learning new information, but also don't feel any source of like guilt or shame or frustration about not knowing something. Like, I remember last year I was grading senior theses that I did not advise, so I don't know anything about this research topic. And I learned fascinating stuff about Australian history, Eastern European history, all things outside of my, expertise. And I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in history, right? You know what I mean? So how much more someone who isn't studying history on a consistent basis and like things of that sort So I think sometimes when there's like guilt or shame or, other, heavy feelings, it actually discourages that desire to want to find something new or to want to explore something new. And then on the socialization and on the future of humanity,
Yeah.
in the coming years, I think we all have to, in reality, go back to like the basic aims of education, almost like the aims of humanities-based liberal arts education, which is to grapple with and explore ideas and to engage in critical thinking. Because I think moving forward, we're trying to blur the line between reality and digital life. You see with like the metaverse and all this other stuff. And there's this deep desire for escapism. So as the world becomes more difficult to bear, we want to retreat into virtual worlds and realities. And in some sense, there are some good use cases for some of these technologies. But in the other sense, we have to go back to the heart of humanities education, which as a humanist, I'm always going to advocate for humanities education and just say like, let's engage critically with what it means to be human, with philosophy, with history, with poetry. I think everyone should read poetry because sometimes poetry can speak to human desires that we don't even know we have that are influencing our decisions. Like, why is that Reddit thread speaking to you? Why do you have a dopamine release, when you see something happening to somebody else? Like, where is our care ethic when it comes to speaking to strangers? Like, we don't even look strangers in the eye anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, we'll be sitting on the train or the tube station, wherever you live in the world. And even this idea of someone, stranger talking to us, automatically, we step back and we're like, oh, why are you talking to me? But before we all had something to distract us and to take us into another world, people just talk to people, you know what I mean? And, holding certain cases constant, we have to learn how to engage with one another again. So that's my hope for the future in both senses, is that we can put more emphasis on humanities education as these other fields and things are developing, because we need it. As long as you are breathing and you are human, you need humanities education.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Shae, for coming on my show today. It's been really interesting to hear about all your thoughts and everything. And yeah, I look forward to following all of your work in the future.
Yes, likewise. This is so amazing. I cannot wait for the book. I'm such a huge fan. So I'm fangirling at the same time. It's mutual. It's mutual.
That's great. Well, thank you so much.
No problem.